Chapter 27. Degrees of Affluence. On a warm day in the spring of 1995, while still waiting for the promised inheritance from Germany, our family, apart from Jane, who was living in America at the time, had a day of celebration. Miranda and I had both been studying with the Open University for several years, and this was the year that we both graduated. Miranda in social sciences and I in the arts. Mum, John, David and Tom all attended the ceremony. Really, these events are pretty boring, but as mature students, and especially for the sake of our mother, whose delight in our achievements knew no bounds, we went through it all with good cheer, dressing up in the heavy gowns, being presented with our fancy certificates, and getting our graduation photos taken to prove our worthiness. It didn't really make any difference to me, except that it gave me confirmation of my own ability, if only I set my mind to it. Now that all the studying was over, I felt I could devote more time to Mum, as by now she needed me more than ever. I never felt that my time with her weighed heavily on me, although it saddened me to see how her health was deteriorating. She always tried to be as independent as possible, and often said she felt sorry for me when she needed to call on my help. We expended a lot of emotional energy on feeling sorry for each other, I believe. She suffered a great deal, and for me, being witness to her suffering and not being able to help relieve it was the hardest thing to bear, and she knew that. Whenever she could, she made light of her troubles, and was always as cheerful as it was possible for her to be. Later that year she received a letter from the solicitor telling her that her share of the money from the sale of the land where Jenny Jacobi's house had once stood had been transferred to her bank. Over £400,000 was now in her account. It was less than originally expected because the total fortune was divided 4 ways rather than the original 3, but a very substantial sum nevertheless. For the first time in her life, she felt like a rich woman. The sight of such a large sum being available for her to spend as she wished gave her enormous pleasure, although I often heard her say, "Ach, Chrissy, I wish Hans Werner would have known and could have enjoyed it too." Being the kind of woman she was, she almost immediately started writing cheques to all of us. The first thing Miranda and I did was to pay off our mortgages, and I paid back a very long-standing loan from my father, adding the interest that might have accrued. He had never parted with money willingly, and I didn't want to feel obligated to him any more. He accepted my cheque with alacrity. One of Mum's most pressing concerns was to find herself a house. Living with us, as she had for several months, was not an ideal situation for such an independent spirit, and our house was far too busy and noisy for her taste. Although she found walking very difficult and painful, and stairs were a problem, she was determined to buy herself a decent-sized house. "After all, Chrissy, as a child, I was living in a castle." She still went along with this idea of the children's home having once been a castle. I think that her childhood home, which looks like a large house in the photos, had taken on immense size in her fertile imagination, and the memory, false or otherwise, was a strong and persistent one. "I can afford to have a stair lift put in, and would like to get one of those new electric buggies for getting around. And I can afford to get someone to come and clean my house and do my ironing for me." She'd obviously thought about it a great deal and had all her plans laid out in her mind. It was quite sickening to see how quickly the estate agents, once so disdainful, became fawning sycophants once she presented them with a bank statement to prove she could pay cash for a house. She chose to buy one in Plasterton Avenue, the same road where we lived, but number 90 was right at the top of the road, nearer to the local shops. This was a time just before the property price boom that tripled the prices of houses in that road during the next 5 years, and she was able to buy a large 3-bedroomed house for under £90,000. The sale went through quickly, and soon she owned her very own house for the first time in her life. Her excitement was only tempered by her medical conditions. "If only the money would have come sooner. I don't think I'm well enough any more to travel. I would so much have liked to go to Germany and see Lilo again just one more time. But I don't think I can do that." She let out a deep sigh. "Na ja." It was true. Sadly, the money had come too late for her to indulge her more adventurous dreams. But there was a house to furnish. She wanted to use all the furniture she already owned. "These things I love. I wouldn't get rid of them just because I have the money." We went together to arrange for curtains to be made and for furniture to be chosen. It amused her to go into smart shops and to baffle the snooty shop assistants who didn't really want to put themselves out for this tiny old woman who didn't look as if she could afford their expensive wares. She chose a really top-brand bedroom suite, 2 large wardrobes, a double bed, 2 bedside tables, and a large chest of drawers, and then said, "I think I'd like to have that big desk too. What do you think, Chrissy? Would it fit in the bay window? And what about a dining table and chairs? I think I would like to have those too." The shop assistant couldn't bear the waste of her time no longer. "This furniture is very expensive, madam." Mum held up her head and looked her straight in the eye. "Yes, so? Well, how will you be paying for it all, madam?" She looked at me for help. "We do have credit arrangements, but—" "I will pay for them today," said my mother, relishing the moment. "I will write for the lot a cheque. How soon will they be delivered?" How we laughed over it later as we sat having coffee in the basement cafe. On our way out of the store, Mum's attention was caught by a special display of very lovely and very expensive German dolls in a glass cabinet. "Look, Chris, they're so beautiful." "Which one do you like best?" We spent a long time looking at them, comparing them, pointing out our favourites, and as time went on, I realised that Mum's voice had taken on a yearning tone, and I guessed what that meant. "Do you want to buy one?" She looked slightly embarrassed. "Ach, Bo, it's silly. I'm 82, too old for dolls." Although she said this in a no-nonsense manner, her face belied her words. "No, Mum, you're never too old. You never had any lovely dolls when you were a child. Now you have the money to have whatever you want. If you want one, buy it. Which one do you like best?" "It would be silly." "No, it's not. Choose one. You must have whatever makes you happy. You can afford it now. Why deny yourself?" Still slightly embarrassed, but with mounting excitement, she studied the dolls. "I do like that baby boy one, but it's a waste of money. They're so expensive." "Look, Mum, if it makes you happy, it's not a waste. If it makes you feel any better, just think that one day Jane or David might have children, and they can inherit the doll, okay? Wait there, I'll find an assistant." The doll, which she named Hansel, sat in her living room from that day on, and it was so realistic that sometimes, at first glance, visitors took it for a real baby. In the beginning, Mum had workmen in the house and garden to make improvements. She had her stairlift installed, which gave her easy access to the first floor. Decorating was done and the furniture arrived, and soon she felt really settled in her new home. She loved the space and airiness of it after years of living in flats. She had had difficulty with walking for some time, having to stop and rest on convenient garden walls even on her way to the nearby shops. Now her new red electric buggy gave her a renewed sense of freedom. I often saw her bombing down the road on it at top speed, head held high and a look of real joy on her face. She drove it through the park, down the avenue of horse chestnuts and over the bridge to the city centre and around shops that she hadn't been able to get into easily for some time. Money didn't take away her pain, but it certainly made life more fun. She was still incredibly independent. Although she had help in the house, she still cooked for herself and invited us around for a meal from time to time. She made things simple but tasty. She couldn't stand for long over a stove, but would sit at a table with a tray and sharp knife preparing vegetables. Sometimes she bought herself ready meals from Marks and Spencer, but generally preferred her own cooking. It was after she had lived in her new house for a while that she developed an even more painful condition that was to wear her down and take away much of her joie de vivre. She complained of extreme pain in her neck and shoulders and found it difficult to lift her arms. She was diagnosed with the debilitating condition polymyalgia rheumatica, and her doctor told her that the only and very necessary treatment for this condition was to put patients on steroids. It's supposed to be a temporary condition that patients generally recover from after a while, but in Mum's case this was not to be. The condition never left her completely, and treatment continued with varying doses of steroids and painkillers, inevitably damaging her already fragile spine even further. Her poor body was failing her, although her mind was as sharp as ever. We often wondered if the malnutrition she had suffered as a child was partly the cause of all her physical symptoms. Mum wasn't a big spender. Indeed, once the house was bought and furnished to her satisfaction, there was little she could spend her money on. All the things she would have done, had she been fitter, were now beyond her. She was very generous with friends and family. In 1998, when David was 23, I felt it was about time he found his own place to live. He always pointed out that although he'd like to have his own place, it seemed silly to pay expensive rent to a landlord when we had so much space in our big house. This was true, but I felt it was time for him to become independent. I checked with a mortgage advisor who indicated that although David's income was small, his 7 years of employment with Cardiff Council made him a reliable person to lend money to, and he should be able to get a mortgage. Mum also thought it was a good idea for him to get out onto the housing ladder, and she gave him the money to get started. It paid for a deposit, the legal fees and some furniture. David was very happy to be independent of his parents at last.